This conversation is brought to you ad-free thanks to the generous support of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon community. To gain access to early release of all episodes, the full podcast archives, and other extras, visit patreon.com/Howl in the Wilderness. Thom Cavalli, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. It's really great to meet you.
Yeah, same here. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. Okay, maybe I'll just start with a little bit of context. So, this is the first in a series of podcasts that I've been planning around different mythic figures.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and interestingly, I was supposed to do the first one last week, and me and the person who I'm going to interview, there was a bit of a communication mix-up. Our schedules got crossed, and email got lost, and so we didn't end up recording. And so you're going to be the first in the series, and we're going to be talking about the Trickster today. And I think,
I love it. I love
I
it.
know it's like the Trickster is at work
Right.
even in the attempt to plan
Right.
the series, and kind of like pushing his way to the front.
I love it.
Isn't it?
Synchronicities, they're all over the place.
I know. So, I mean, you're best known for your work in alchemy, but I think the trickster as the spirit Mercurius plays a key role in
Yeah,
a lot of the alchemical myths, right? And in Jung's
absolutely.
concept of the psychology of alchemy. But you mentioned that you had a personal story about how the trickster first showed up in your life, and I thought that'd be a fun place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm also a writer, so writers know to start with a good personal story. And my story begins when I began graduate studies in San Diego. And there was a number of things going on at the time. Part of my education required that I do an internship. Didn't have any money, so I also dubbed the internship as a job. So I was working full time. And I was working in an agency that was fairly popular at the time. It was a substance abuse agency called Community Resources and Self-Help. Make a note of that because I'll come back to it in a moment. Part of the duties that I had working there was once a week I needed to go. Oh, let me back up. Let me say a little bit more about my job. So I was working with alcoholic individual, chemically dependent people of all stripes, street addicts, people that ran methadone clinics, you name it. And at the time, I was beginning my dissertation work, and so I was beginning to put the clinical experience at the internship with my more academic dissertation work. Um, so what I noticed over the time that I was working there is that we were both trying to manipulate each other. You know, different people who would come in, they were either having to satisfy their probation officer or whatever the thing was, but they at some level, you know, even to acquire drugs, whatever it might be, was to trick me, basically. But at the same time, I was trying to, in a sense, manipulate and trick them as well into a higher level of consciousness.
Hmm.
And that really caught my attention. It was fascinating to me, this kind of in between, this place where each of us met, and each of us, in some way, were changed by it. Much later, during my graduate education, they actually had a name for it, big fancy clinical name for it called the intersubjective field. We didn't have a name for that, but the name for me, and this is how Trickster pops into it, is him.
Hmm.
It was a very mercurial interaction place where we were meeting in this field somewhere between him, her, and myself. Okay. So that was launched me into actually writing my dissertation on the trickster. At the same time, going back to what I was saying previously, my jobs involved going once a week to this girls' rehab facility they called a juvie. and I would counsel the girls in their cells, and I did that once a week. Now, if you know San Diego, they have these canyon roads, and I was on this two-lane road when I did something I don't think I've done much in my life. Certainly at the time, I had never picked up a hitchhiker, but at that point I did. A blue-eyed, blonde-haired kid that must have been, I don't know, 12, 13 years old. By the time I had achieved 55 miles an hour, a sailor asleep at the wheel came around the bend and smacked straight into me. It was a very, very serious head-on collision. Fortunately, at the time, I was had taken the summer off between my master's and my doctoral studies, and then it gave me time to recuperate. But the point that this story is leading up to say about the trickster, he turns your world upside down.
Mm.
Just as you were telling me, your schedule is turned upside down. And that is one of the principal features of the trickster. And so for the next 40 years, I've been pondering and analyzing what happened. And believe it or not, because it seems apparent now, but it didn't for all these years, community resources and self-help is a mouthful. So people in the community didn't call it by that name. They called it crash.
Huh.
So it had its stamp, on that period of my life. What I came to realize, and this has much to do with this inversion, that the trickster was playing in my life at the time. And that had to do with what I was doing was studying to become a psychotherapist principally. But what I much, much later came to realize as I start to literally put the pieces together is that life, God, nature, whatever, had something broader in mind for me. And I hesitate even to use this word, but it's the only thing that comes to mind to describe what happened. So while I'm busy in academic studies, writing dissertations, etc., all up in the head, I have this crash. And what I came to realize, it was a rite of passage.
Hmm.
And the rite of passage brought me into this word that is a little unwieldy for me, and that's healer. And I don't do physical alchemy or make potions like that. I'm still, wearing that garb, which is a little uncomfortable and trying to make sense of it. So that was going on at that time. But also there was another very important factor, and that has to do with Rajneesh.
Hmm.
Uh,
Also known as Osho.
well, much, much, much later, well beyond the time that I was no longer a sannyasin or a devotee, I don't know if he took the name or it was given to him of Osho, but I knew him as Rajneesh. And the way he popped into my life, first of all, I've been haunting used bookstores and libraries since I was a child.
Me
And
too.
on this one particular day in San Diego, I went into a new bookstore and struck up a conversation with the innkeeper. And within minutes, he said, "Oh, I have a book that might interest you." I said, "Sure." It doesn't take much for me to buy a book. And that book was Only One Sky, written, or, well, Rajni didn't really write books, it was more verbally delivered. And that book was by Rajneesh. And again, at the same time, my life was turned upside down because I absolutely, like millions of people around the world, was enchanted with him.
Mm.
Absolutely enchanted. It was a 4 or 5 year love affair. I mean, to the point that beneath my black doctoral robes at the ceremony getting my doctorate, I had my orange clothes and my mala, which I've kept up all of these years. And it's kind of interesting if you've never seen a mala, his mala, it has a picture of
No.
him at the middle.
Yeah, so if
I could
people are
hold that
only
up.
listening, it's a Rudraksha mala, and it's got a little photo of
Right.
Rajneesh slash Osho on it. Yeah.
It's
Wow.
kind of funny because I mean, here I am, become studying to become a psychologist. And at the time, they had brought in Maurice Friedman, who was a fairly famous philosopher. who I don't think knows anything about much about spirituality, but he saw that mala, saw the picture, and he kind of squinted his eyes and says, "Was that a picture of your dog?"
This hairy, shaggy dog.
Which made me laugh, but I didn't take it so much as an insult, because from a point of view of Rajneesh, if he had been listening to that, he would have loved it.
Yeah.
The trickster in him, and he is a trickster par excellence, uh, is friendly. He's a
Mm.
friendly companion. He serves us as in many different ways, including communication and language and the written word, etc. So all of these factors were kind of coming together. The Rajneesh, the crash, my studies, etc. And through that, I dove into my dissertation studies and quickly learned that in the last 30 years of Dr. Jung's life, he was studying alchemy. And you can't study alchemy without becoming familiar with Mercurius, because he is the archetypal patron of alchemy for many good reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Mm.
So that's as brief a summary as I can give you about how Trickster kind of, popped into my life and has been with me ever since. I will also just add a footnote to that, which I think is relevant. So in the Indian tradition, you're given a name, a new name, because it's kind of like, I guess, in a Christian sense, reborn.
Hmm.
And so the new name isn't so much a tag or a title. It's a path. And the name that I was given on this blank letterhead from his ashram. This is the ashram, by the way, that was in Pune.
Hmm.
That is significant also. I think we'll get to that in time. Because when the ashram moved to Oregon, things
Everything changed.
literally turned upside down for me as well, personally.
Mm.
In any event, my given spiritual name is Anand Vichara. Now, Anand Vichara means blissful thought,
Mm.
and that has been my path. That's what he left to me is my path. And I've been walking that path and using it in terms of my lectures, seminars, workshops, writing this, all kinds of things. So that's what my path involves, and I'm very, if anything, because I have some really negative views about Bhagwan as well, which we'll get to. But that is the wisdom or the gift, I should say, that he left me.
Mm. How would you interpret that name, blissful thought?
Well, that kind of gets mythological actually, because the history of the archetype of the trickster goes way back, some 5,000 years ago, to perhaps one of the first tricksters, and that was the ancient Egyptian trickster Tahat. And Tahat was a magical god, um, god of magic, god of communication. He was known to have written the much of the Book of the Dead, etc. Also, this is also taking place in India, where Ganesha, another trickster god, was known to have written I think he wrote the Bhagavad Gita. That might be mistaken about that, but the important thing is both of them, and in the tradition of all trickster personifications, have much to do with language.
Hmm.
Even in Christianity, we talk about the word was made flesh. So words are, they're symbolic, but they also represent a train of thought that can easily trick us, can easily be contaminated. But if you have enough equanimity to not be misled, then what you're producing, whether it's in written word or the oral tradition, carries some amount of universal truth.
Mm. Hence the bliss part,
That is a very blissful place to be. Absolutely.
like truth, consciousness, bliss, Sat Chitananda.
Yeah. Or in alchemy, it would be the consciousness that's represented by their symbol, which is the philosopher's stone,
Mm.
which has this kind of a groundedness and a kind of a stability to it. And I think that's what truth has. It's not, it's not siloed to this moment. It's something that is universal,
Eternal.
transcendent, eternal, transcendent. Yes.
Mhm.
Now, I
And in
mean, there are
truth, like the lapis philosophorum also transforms you.
if you're effective, yes.
Mhm.
And when I say that is, the trickster can be absolutely your worst enemy or your best friend.
Mm.
And so it's prudent to be on his good side.
Mm.
And being on his good side, I mean, amounts to recognizing, talking about him. Every archetype wants to be be remembered.
Yeah, before we started recording or before we got online, and I do this often when we're going to be speaking about a particular god, I recite the Orphic and the Homeric hymn, you know,
Okay, yeah,
trying to
yeah,
like, make
yeah.
friends with the god that we're going to be invoking here. I don't want to be disrespectful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have to be very careful, though, when we use words like God. And we Jungians
Mm.
commonly talk about the archetypes as if they were gods. But these are representations. These are personifications because an archetype at bottom is a pattern.
Hmm.
And you can no more touch a pattern than you can touch the vibration of a word or the wave in the ocean. You could see its ripple, but that's the personified form of it. And
Yeah.
I think this is really important when we come to back to Rajneesh, because what I've come to learn about him, well, there's a lot that I've come to learn about him, but not the least of which I don't think of Rajneesh so much, or the trickster for that more, particularly the trickster, as necessarily a person.
Hmm.
The archetypal trickster is change. He is the process of change and transformation. He is by far the most difficult archetype to deal with.
Hmm.
Because if you have a mother archetype, you could easily say, well, it had to do with my anima, or my mother, or my girlfriend. It's more siloed that way. It's more specific. But change,
Yeah.
it's very elusive.
Yeah, by its nature, it's mercurial.
It's
You
like,
can't grasp it. Like I remember being a kid in the 80s, in science class. We'd
right.
break open a thermometer
I
and start to play
remember.
around with the mercury, and it would turn into these little balls, and it'd be kind of rolling all over the place and then forming back together, and
Right, right.
not
Little,
recommended,
little,
but
little, and little did we know that it's poisonous.
yeah, which is also interesting.
Well, it is interesting because in ancient Greece, they would call it a pharmakon. A
Mm.
pharmakon is something that could just as well be poisonous as it can be as healing.
Hmm.
Again, there's that in Jungian alchemy, we call that the psychoid. That's that strange, elusive place where mind and matter somehow or other intermingle and produce the world that we live in. All the opposites are right there. And certainly, the trickster's juggling, those
Mm.
opposites all the time.
Mm. Yeah, wasn't it? I think it was Karenyi who talked about Hermes as a kind of a third state of consciousness between the Apollonian rational and the Dionysian irrational.
Exactly.
So
Yes.
that in-between space, so that mixture of
Exactly.
both, the
Yeah.
place of the yes and.
And in between.
Hmm.
And so Hermes in ancient Greece was known as the Lord of the Crossroads.
Hmm.
Is where all of those opposite kind of come together, and there's commerce and there's marketing and there's exchange. That's where all the action is.
Hmm.
And so what they did again to honor and be on the good side of Hermes, they would erect what they call Herm stones, which are these images of stone sculptures of Hermes on a block. And then there's always this protruding phallus that points
Hmm.
outward because he was a very kind of, in his lower form, was very kind of sexual,
Hmm.
um, like fertilizing, very project. He's out there because he is, in alchemy, we draw a distinction between soul and spirit, and he's a spirit. The spirit typically is thought to be more masculinely toned. And what that means, I don't mean so much of physical gender, but its attributes have a lot to do with movement. The spirit is very restless, whereas the soul has depth, it's deep, whereas the The spirit is very light. It's very ascension oriented. Depth.
Air element. This
Right.
is soul, watery, earthy,
Exactly. So when you
slower.
talk about Apollo, you're talking about the high register. When you're talking about the soul, we're getting more into the earthy, physical nature of the trickster. And in some of the stories, which are ubiquitous throughout all cultures of trickster, one comes to mind from the Winnebago Indian culture. Wonderful stories.
Yeah,
Uh,
wild stories.
Wild, um, descriptive of the evolution, between the Apollonian and the Dionysian. But it starts off with this character who is half animal, half man, creature, who is completely disjointed, dislocated. I mean, so much though in the early part of the cycle where he's cutting one hand has a knife and the other one has a knife and they're arguing and cutting each other as he watches.
Right.
But eventually he becomes he a savior basically, because he evolves not so I mean certainly within the story, but he evolves within us. So that the Apollonian and the Dionysian, are hybrid, but they find some kind of integrated, if not transcendent place.
Hmm. What about like going back to Rajneesh Osho?
Yeah.
What do you think his function was in his, coming to the West, bringing what he brought, being this figure who
Hmm.
caused a stir, caused a lot of upheaval?
Yeah.
The way I just think of him, I love him. I think he's so funny. And I think he was like a mirror for these spiritually hungry Americans, and he gave people exactly what they wanted. And in doing so, kind of showed them that what they wanted was silly or false or,
He was a
and
trickster. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I also call him, I think he's the best, the greatest performance artist of the 20th century. Because I think the whole thing was like a work of art. It was just a big play.
Well, that's funny you should say that because at the time, when I was in college, I had a joint major and it was between fine art and psychology. And I started off painting, drawing the classical kinds of art stuff, but I really, really got into conceptual art. And many of my seminars are really performance pieces. So, for example, for about 4 or 5 years, I was doing a seminar for this magical mystery school. And we started off talking about ancient Egyptian mummification. But rather than doing the Apollonian, well, this is this and this is that, I created an experience where we literally did what I call the mummy wrap. We would wrap people up and they would stay in that state for a good hour.
Hmm.
So it was a performance piece that gave them the experience. So it was more Dionysian, than, something just cerebral. And that's where you have to meet the trickster. He is funny. Osho, is a combination of a performance artist and a great sage, and you're never quite sure which he is. Um, and I think he loved that, but going back to what I said about the trickster and Osho is, I don't know that he was, I mean, he certainly was a real person. I mean, we know his biography, we know when he lived and died, etc. But this is his epitaph to make my point that he really represents change. This is his words, his epitaph on death, or was written for him. He was never born and never died, but only visited this planet Earth between, and they give the dates of his birth and death. So there is that kind of impersonality.
Hmm.
Um, the problem that I have with him, for all his wisdom and his encyclopedic knowledge, not to mention going back to if you've ever listened to him, it sounds like you may have, forget about what he was saying. It was how he was saying it.
Hmm.
In poetry, they call it breath line poetry. And every word would be carried on a breath.
Yeah.
And whether you agree with what he was saying or not, it was just absolutely masterful the way he would vocalize these wisdom traditions.
That's,
Profound.
I mean, that's so interesting because when I do my imitation of Osho, that's the thing I picked up on. And I've often wondered, like, what was going on there? Because I don't know if people haven't really listened to him. He had this way of speaking, and it'd always be like a hiss. Like you said, the words were kind of carried on a breath. And it's the most peculiar way of
Mhm.
speaking. And I wondered, is this
Mhm.
because he's in a state while he's speaking? It's just kind of, that's the way the oracle is coming through, or
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
it like a technique of kind of hypnotizing the audience, getting them into a state of,
Yeah.
calm
Yeah.
and receptivity, like kind of,
Yeah. Yeah.
or,
Well, I'm going to pick up on your word hypnotized, because it was hypnotic, very hypnotic. I mean, you find yourself entranced because he's revealing much of what we repress.
hmm
So there's a story he tells that I really like, and it's a short story, and it has to do with this mean and very haughty, very wealthy magician, and he has sheep, but he doesn't have a shepherd. He doesn't fence them in, and so the sheep are just running all over the place, mostly away from him because he knows he's going to have them for dinner at some point. So the townspeople are really pissed off and say, they complain to him, and he goes, I got a remedy. And the remedy is he hypnotizes the sheep, and he has them thinking that that they're a lion, they're an eagle, they're even magicians. And what he's really communicating to them is that they're immortal, and that when the time comes for them to be skinned, don't worry about it. You're immortal. And I think that's a beautiful metaphoric example. This goes back to Jung because Jung's interest in alchemy actually didn't start there. It started with his interest in Gnosticism.
hmm
And if you know much about Gnosticism, this world that we live in is a world of delusion that was created by the demiurge. And basically, we're living in this delusional world, where we are hypnotized and hypnotized to in a sense that we we don't have access to direct knowledge, which is the gnosis.
hmm
Anyway, I'm trailing off on this word
Yeah.
hypnosis, but it does figure into where we live now. I mean, turn on the boob tube and we're hypnotized. I mean, it's so duplicitous that we will watch endless commercials put out by pharmaceutical companies, and they got these pretty pictures in the background, and then they list their side effects, not the least of which includes death.
Yeah. I know these
I mean, they
horrifying.
actually use the word death. They're actually saying this product will kill you.
I know. I mean, we're up in Canada if people don't know, but every time we travel to the States, it's like you get to the Airbnb or the hotel room, you turn on the TV, see kind of what's going on,
Yeah.
and we see these ads that we don't get up here because there's
Oh.
legislation around it.
Oh,
You're not
really?
allowed to advertise like that. But watching these commercials, it's like every other commercial is a pharmaceutical commercial, and it's all these like happy people playing in the field, and then this guy very quickly saying like, "Oh, may cause vomiting, diarrhea, death."
Right. And they're not going out of business.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, there's arguments that say, they're mostly interested in money and less in health, and that, like medicines for dementia, for example, they prolong the disease, and
Mhm.
basically they're self-serving. They create these things that will, keep you alive so many more years that you'll keep buying their drugs.
Right. Keep the consumer alive.
I mean, by
Um,
the way, I have to add a caveat. I mean, as a practicing psychologist, if I feel somebody needs an SSRI, whatever, I don't hesitate. So, I mean, there is a place as long as
Yeah.
you're, not, that you are walking the middle path, that you understand the pros and the cons.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
Hermes can bring you either way. Mercurius can bring you either way.
Yeah, like the pharmacon. It can be a
Yes,
poison or it can be a medicine.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of pharmaceuticals, what is going on with the trickster and the relationship to the phallus? Like there is an aspect of the kind of the primordial, the inseminating, the creation, but there's also that aspect of the profane. Like I think it's in the Winnebago myth, and the trickster's got like this penis wrapped around his body, and it's detachable, and and all these different stories. You carry it around in a
Right.
box, and it gets lost, or
Well, it gets more than that. He sends it downstream to where the Indian maiden girls are bathing. That's a sneaky way of inseminating.
I mean,
But he isn't integrated. He
yeah.
carries his penis like on a backpack. He's not integrated.
Right. But I mean, does it have something to do with, when a man is overcome with lust, he kind of stops thinking and becomes more instinctual, more irrational. It's like, we have this joke in the West, you think with your head up here, or you're thinking with your little head, and the little head is what's going to get you in trouble.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a common failure that I see among in my patients and clients. And it draws a distinction between sex, I mean, physical sex, which animals can do. Animals have sex all the time. They have progeny, they produce babies, etc. But the difference, between that physical sexual drive and eroticism and all the points in between, whether it be, movies, I mean, what kind of movie would you watch where it doesn't have sex in it? You
Mhm. But how is it portrayed? And like, is it sex as a way to bring you to a kind of a higher state? Or, is it expansive or is it just kind of base and
Yeah.
animalistic? And not
Yeah.
saying, morally that one is better than the other. But again,
Mhm.
it points to this kind of in between. Like there's the
Exactly.
Dionysian pleasure principle, the
Yeah. Yeah.
lustful body centered aspect, and then this higher aspect.
Exactly. And so Jung, the way he described this is that there's a continuum. And on the bottom of the continuum are the instincts. This is the Freudian world, And by the way, it does much relate, I think, to Osho, because he gave us permission to allow the id with all its sexual and aggressive drives, to just burst out. I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean, he
there's
came
been
around at the tail end of the very repressive era of the like 1940s and 50s. So right along with the kind of the
exactly,
60s uprising and the psychedelic
exactly.
movement and
Exactly. Yeah, free love
love,
and
free love, all that stuff. And then
right.
there's this guru comes along and says, "Look, you got to let this stuff out." And he
Yeah.
created environments and scenarios where people could actually get into it with all the primal screaming and the
Oh,
tantric
he had
sex stuff.
one of his first classes that you would take at Pune, his ashram in Pune. It literally is called fighting and fucking. So
Let's
just
get this out of the
get
way. I
over
mean,
it,
get over it.
or get through it, I guess you might say. But
Yeah.
to answer the larger question you're asking, it brings us back to alchemy. All right. Well, before I get to that, so the bottom of this continuum that I began to describe are the instincts. In the Freudian paradigm, those instincts basically come down to sex and aggression. And at one point, they're not even differentiated.
Fighting and fucking.
Yeah, exactly. And if you don't separate and integrate them, you get rapists, which
Hmm.
is really some weird mixture of sexuality and aggression.
Right.
So that occupies the lower part of that continuum. But at the higher levels is the archetypal world. And it's not one or the other. In my first book, Alchemical Psychology, what I talk about, and this is to your point, is the integration. It's bringing both into the middle And what that middle is called is the royal marriage.
Hmm.
It's the royal marriage, it's the royal integration that draws the best from the Apollonian world to from the Dionysian world. It's integrated.
Hmm.
But to get there is no easy thing, and it begins with confronting, dealing with, aligning with the shadow. And I bring that back up because I really don't, for all of his smarts, I don't think Osho was really in touch with his shadow.
Hmm.
I mean, if you read, I wrote an article in 2018. This was the turning point, by the way, for me when it came to Osho. I mean, I had read a little bit about the horrors that were going on in what they call Rancho Rajneeshland or Pune or whatever they called it. And I mean, you had guns, poisoning, bombs. To my mind, that just doesn't mix with my ideal of what we would want. He was very good at dissolving structures, but I don't think he was very responsible and took ethical responsibility for what was being built.
Hmm.
And to think that he was somehow or other in silence and, whatever he was doing is not founded by the evidence. Because his chief lieutenant, her name was Ma Anand Sheila, would have counsel with him every night. And according to her story, he was giving directions. So he was well aware of what was going on. So in alchemy, that's the solve in the recipe solve et coagula. So things need to be broken apart before they can be reunited into a finer fashion. The ultimate, that's the solve, and then that's the dissolution, and the coagula is the coagulation. It's the bringing back together. But unless transcend those opposites into what Jung called the tertium, the third place, which is the transcendent peak, all you're doing is you're tearing it down and you're putting things back together, and it's an endless compulsive loop. It's like the
Hmm.
Ouroboros, which can be looked at one of two ways. It can be looked at as a compulsive activity, a dog chasing its tail, a lot of activity, not going anywhere, or you could see it as a symbol of immortality and eternity, or the royal marriage. So, um, the dark side, that you don't hear much about came out in this series of a documentary. This was the turning point for me. It was called Wild Wild Country,
Yeah.
and
A lot of people's actually first introduction to Osho, kind of unfortunately, because
it
they
is,
didn't tell the
yeah,
story of
yeah,
his brilliance.
yeah. But for me, what it did, because I did have many years of that. I mean, I over here I must have, I don't know, I counted maybe at least 20 of his books, which are beautiful. I mean,
Hmm.
not only as an author, I like to feel a book, and some of these are wrapped in silk. I mean, it's really quite beautiful. Um, and he was a new age guru. He knew how to manipulate media, but he didn't take control, I guess you'd say, or responsibility for the building up. I mean, people were getting poisoned and hurt. I mean, Sheila literally had a gun on her hip,
Hmm.
and Rajneesh was using Valium and sedatives
Yeah,
and
he was checked
screwing, and
out.
he had 50, whatever it was, Rolls Royces. He was kind of flaunting it in a way.
Hmm.
But, that's on the personal level that I think really gives us insight to the fact that we all have projections, particularly guru projections. We all want to, be giving the permission, to be real and express ourselves fully, whether it's from the top or the bottom. But that can be really dangerous in the wrong hands. That's why alchemy is laced with secrets, because in the wrong hands, mercury is a poison. They even say that it killed Sir Isaac Newton, who was a practicing alchemist.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of like Osho's wrong turn was that I think he was more of a solve character. He was there to dissolve,
Yeah,
to deconstruct, to tear
right,
apart, to overturn. Like
right.
the trickster's not a good structuralist or a construction worker.
No, no.
And so when turned into the ashram, the commune in Oregon,
Yeah,
it was an organization. It was its own, I guess, municipality. So there was
yeah,
political
yeah,
stuff going on,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it was like, and that's where I think where Sheila came in, and Osho kind of checked out, and I think that's where they went wrong, you know?
Well, totally. I mean, so wrong that he came to the attention of the authorities, and he was kicked out basically because in Pune they had lost their tax exempt status. They were drawing too many people in, etc. So they kicked him out of Pune. Comes to Oregon, and ultimately he comes to Oregon on a medical visa and receives no medical treatment. So it obviously was a sham that ultimately caught up with him. And then, he tries to escape to Florida and they caught up with him on this private jet and he ends up being fined $400,000, I think it was, a tremendous amount of money, and then shipped back, to India. I have to admit, I have a pet peeve about certain people who abuse their status. They
Mhm.
abuse their power. In my corporate days when I was working at a psychiatric hospital, there were two people that in that part of my life, I haven't done that for years, that I terminated, that I have to fire. And both of them were really perpetrating, I wouldn't say embezzlement, but they were drawing outside the lines in a way that could have been dangerous to patients. It's kind of like they got too grandiose. So, if you get too much into those Apollonian spheres, it could lead to grandiosity, mania, and then something's going to happen, like Icarus. You're going to be brought back to Earth because the psyche is homeostatic. It's always looking like water for balance. So
Mhm.
if you're flying too high, somebody, whether it's me firing you or it's nature giving you an overdose, you're going to be brought down to earth.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's an aspect of the trickster that I wanted to speak to you about how it can help correct grandiosity or
Yeah, yeah,
one-sidedness.
yeah,
Often, when we become too serious or too pious or, too Apollonian, too pure, too identified with the
yeah,
sunlight,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
something will come along
yeah,
to subvert that.
yeah,
And just a kind of a funny anecdote of my own. So we live pretty much in the woods out here, and so we have a lot of wildlife coming through the yard, and bears, cougars,
yeah,
and so last week it was nighttime, and the dog had to go out for her nighttime business.
yeah,
And I was out there and I thought I heard something like a large animal. I thought maybe it was a cougar attacking a rabbit or something. There's something going on.
yeah,
And so I put her on a lead and I kind of crept down the stairs and I'm listening very intently. I'm cautious about her because, she could go
yeah,
running after something and get hurt. So I'm like
yeah.
very cautious. I'm very tense. I'm going down, like listening intently. And then all of a sudden I hear very close by this like, this grunting sound or chuffing sound like a cougar will make. And of course, I let out like a roar and scurried up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest, and only to hear from the bedroom window my wife chuckling to herself, actually cackling. And, and of course, my first response, my first reaction is like irritation. I was like, you know what, this is serious. There's something out there.
Right. It
And then
reminds
so,
me. It reminds
so
me.
I'm like, I get really kind of serious and uptight about it, right?
Yeah.
And then later, I'm like brushing my teeth, getting ready for bed, and the scene is playing out in my mind again. Only it's from my wife's perspective, up in the window, making the sound like a cougar while I'm stalking around the
Was she doing that purposefully?
backyard. Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, she was.
Oh yeah, no, she was getting me. And so I'm like seeing it now from her perspective and I start laughing to myself, seeing myself kind of react in this way and how funny that must have been. Um, but I think there's something in that about the trickster, right? Like my initial reaction was like serious and uptight,
Of course.
and she's like playing a trick on me. And when I
Exactly.
see it from her perspective, I just kind of lighten up and I go back to bed and I go, you know what, that
Right,
was pretty
right,
funny what you
right,
did,
right,
right?
right, right, right. Yeah. It reminds
So
me of
it's like
another.
a loosening,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
movement, like you said, like moving from like kind of
Well, it's also
uptightness
it's
and
yeah, it's regulatory. Um, there's a story that Rajneesh tells. I think it's a Zen story where this man is in a boat and there's another boat that's approaching and it hits him and he's all pissed off and furious until he realizes there's nobody in the boat.
it's just a loose boat.
You're
You're
right.
right. Yeah,
Right.
it's like yeah, getting mad at the wind or something.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Um, and so this kind of regulatory function of the trickster, for example, again in Native American myths, well, actually, it's not a myth. This actually would take place with something that's called the Hioka, which is a shaman, a very trickster type character, who occupied. You see, he occupied a very sacred place in the tribe.
Hmm.
So that when the chief, Apollonian, is issuing all of these orders and people are going, yeah, 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 and not questioning him, the Hioka, the trickster, would make fun of him, just like the jester in medieval times. But he was allowed to make fun of the king or the chief because he held a sacred position and he represented what people were not allowed to do.
Hmm.
So there's the balance, again, between the higher and the lower registers that I was describing earlier.
Hmm.
The other thing is, since you brought up animals, I think also we need to pay attention because these personification of trickster can just as easily, and do, oftentimes are personified and projected onto animals. In Native American, the one that I like probably the best is spider, which you also find in Africa. Um, but in Native American culture, the myth is that and I don't think it's a myth, I think this is actually true, that when a spider makes her nest, her spider web, that she sits in the middle, of course, waiting for her dinner to approach. But the lines that are protruding outward are sticky, and
Hmm.
the lines that go directly at the center of what we might consider a mandala are not sticky. So when the prey comes in, it knows instinctively not to go right, not to go left, but follow right to the heart, right to the middle, where of course the hungry spider is just waiting for its prey.
Huh. Interesting.
See,
I didn't know that about the
that's
stickiness
trickster.
of the web.
Yeah, that's trickster.
Hmm. Kind of guiding you, like Hermes being a guide,
Yeah.
but guiding you to your demise,
Well, the
which is
relationship. Yeah,
which
I
is
mean,
also about renewal.
just that's exactly what I was going to say. Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the cycle of life. It's neither right nor wrong. It just
Well,
is. It's life living.
that's what animals know. And by
Hmm.
the way, that's what our body knows. However unconscious it is. It is honest, it's true. Animals don't lie.
Hmm.
When it's time for them to go, they go. It's not abstracted and afterlife and old fantasies or whatever. It just is their reality.
Hmm.
So they are specialists, and they have a certain wisdom, that transcends, this terminal, coil, this, that we're wrapped up in this life. So
Yeah. Well, I mean,
there's
for
an
us to,
intimacy. There's an intimacy
yeah,
between the body, the animal, the instinctual world, and death just being a part of it.
yeah. Well, and just to pick up on that, the body being a kind of a trickster to the Apollonian mind, perhaps, like revealing what's really going on, and that could be, like blushing,
Yeah.
revealing that you're embarrassed, or the inconvenient erection showing that you're turned
Yeah.
on,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
whatever it is. But and
Yeah.
so I wonder if that's a part of like why the erect phallus is always kind of wrapped up in this different trickster myths and
Well, I don't think you could just talk about the phallic aspect without talking about its opposite, which is the feminine.
Mhm.
I mean, the royal marriage is both. It's Luna and Sol. It's the masculine and the feminine.
I know, but
And
the trickster figures are never feminine. They're always masculine.
well, right over there, I'm pointing to a book in my trickster section that is about female tricksters.
Ah.
Um, it's the same with alchemy, by the way, because the field going back 1,000 years is dominated by men. You know, pick up any book on alchemy and you'll read men did this and men did that. But increasingly, by the way, there are people, Sharon Grimes is one, there are a couple of other women, scholars who are now saying, no, 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 no. There were feminine, female alchemists. So we really, if you just talk about in an abstract way, the masculine and the feminine, without there actually being a female place for them. For example, in every alchemist, with few exceptions, including Newton and Paracelsus that I know of, didn't have what they call a Sora Mystica, a sister of the mysteries, who brought in a very practical way, the feminine. You have to have opposite if you hope to integrate them. So, no, I think that there are I'm not that learned, about, talking about the feminine aspect in terms of animals, but in Taoism, for example, you got the yin yang sign, and the yin is the feminine,
Mhm.
but it has a bit of the masculine in it, and this movement, is what creates consciousness, new consciousness.
Yeah, I always thought that the trickster is always portrayed as masculine, so that because we can be kind of like bumbling idiots, and there's in the trickster stories, it's often like
Yeah,
the trickster through his bumbling makes a mess of things, and then
yeah,
kind of in spite of himself everything kind of turning out, for the better. And,
yeah,
like a
yeah,
character
yeah,
like Homer
yeah,
Simpson was playing that role in popular
yeah,
culture.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Every show would be like Homer messes up something, but at the end, it all comes out right. And
Right, right, right. And he wants to be seen. He's very obvious. Physically and also he protrudes into your life, literally poking fun at you. But when you say bumbling, that brings another memory back to mind. I had just gotten my doctorate and I was invited by Dr. Chris Downing, who was my chairperson, to a private party she was having. And at the time, when I was in graduate school, there was a book called Revisioning Psychology, it was a breakthrough book for James Hillman. He was touted to be the next Jung and all of this kind of stuff. And anyway, he was there at the party. And at the time, his mantra was, what does soul want? And within a minute or two of being introduced to him with my shiny new doctorate, he says, what does soul want? And boy, I was bumbling because I had spent all of these years, studying about spirit, and it really bugged me for years and years and years. Because what I could have said is, it's not so much about what does soul want? Soul wants spirit.
mm,
There's an inner attraction between the two. They can be antithetical, but it's our job to bring conscious awareness to that integration.
mhm.
So he had half the story. Now, I'm not condemning. I mean, Helm was a genius, but it was that bumbling moment when the trickster had me, as the butt of the joke.
Yeah, yeah, the newly minted doctor,
Right.
right?
I'm
Yeah,
supposed to know these answers. I'm supposed
yeah.
to have these answers.
Well, I mean, I love Hillman, and we did a big series on revisioning
Uh,
psychology because it
oh,
was the
really?
50th anniversary last year.
Oh,
And I think very much he was a kind of a trickster figure. And one of the things, like unlike Osho, one of the things that I appreciate him is that he was a kind of anti-structuralist through and through to the end.
very much so.
He
Yes.
really resisted anything, any kind of
Yeah.
organization being built up, or
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
practical books being written, turning
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
theory into
Yeah.
dogma.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. He was like that until the end, and therefore got, I think, a lot less trouble than Osho.
Oh, he had his share of trouble.
Oh, I know, I know. That's part of the trickster too. Every time he tried to affiliate with an organization, he'd screw it up somehow.
Well, he literally screwed one of his analysans.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
got him in big trouble
Well, and
and kicked
then
out.
yeah, and then married Patricia Perry.
Right,
Made it right.
right, right.
Well, this has been really great. I mean, it's kind of like if it's scatological and kind of all over the place, well, that's the nature of this archetype. If we tried to like put it all together in a neat and tidy package, it wouldn't be true to the archetype, right?
Well, because it brings us right back to what you said at the very beginning. You know, he turned your schedule upside down.
Yeah. I wanted to conclude by talking a little bit about the work that you do, like what your practice has turned into, and you call it alchemical coaching.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What does that look like? What does that entail? How is it different from psychotherapy?
I'm constantly trying to figure that out.
Yeah, it's one of those questions like, what
Even
does
though I've
soul
been,
want? Like, what am I doing?
um, I was very, very medically trained. I mean, not so much in school, but in postdoc, hung around hospitals, around physicians quite a bit. So I kind of adopted that model, which is exactly that. It's a model, and unfortunately, too many physicians forget that it is a model. It's like the pointing finger is not the moon; it's the
Hmm.
pointing finger. Um, so for I've been practicing now a little over 40 years and following that model, not just the model that the medical model, but for many, many years I was using, patients' insurance, and they have their own model that's very congruent with the medical model. It's very efficient, blah, 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 for money reasons. Um, but over the course of these years, I realized, that in a sense, in the language we're using is too Apollonian, it's
Hmm.
too masculine, it's too goal oriented. And that's not where people live, you know? Even alchemy, I'm writing a book right now called Living Alchemy, where I'm really kind of denuding alchemy, stripping of that masculine tone, chaos to order, etc., and trying to
Hmm.
bring it right down to earth. So to kind of be more specific in answering your question, I stopped kind of saying, okay, patient, you're going to go from the negrito and into the albedo,
Right. Yeah.
and all of that involves, it looks good on paper,
Right. I
and,
know. We
but
love a
it's
good model.
right, right.
Yeah.
Well, it's not how we live our lives. So this new book has very much to do with what I call visceral alchemy. It's kind of bringing it right down to earth. So, for example, just one quick example, there's an order of colors. So the Negrito is black, there's white, and then there's red. Sometimes there's yellow, etc. So one morning, I'm sitting in my living room having my coffee, and I usually get up before dawn. And I'm just sitting there sipping my coffee, kind of in a meditative state. And I'm realizing that some alchemist must have been doing the same thing, noticing the light changes.
Mm. Right.
And so, it's not so conceptual. It's kind of like, oh, it goes from dark and then eventually the light comes in, et cetera. So with that kind of new attitude, I don't just follow some prescriptive recipe for working with people in alchemical coaching. It's kind of like meet the patient, meet the individual, meet the person where they are. And by the way, Jung literally said as much. So I grab this and grab that if it's appropriate for some people, that kind of model, that kind of language. If I explain a little bit, it's not so weird. To turn lead into gold, that kind of sounds chemical and weird, perhaps. But if you take it as a metaphor, it's individuation. And we're all trying to struggle with the shadow of the lead, if we're courageous enough to look at ourselves and begin to realize that there's a bit of gold already, flakes of gold already embedded in our worst shadow. This is the trickster element. And so my work is trying to focus on that. I'll give you a very quick example. Here's a guy who has a disorder called chronic inflammatory disease or something like that. And he is so consumed, with it's become his identity. He had to
Hmm.
move from the north to the New Mexico, and he's almost like a germaphobe. And I said to him, and this was just last week, I said to him, you ever stop and have the thought that you don't have this problem?
Hmm.
You ever stop and think that, maybe it's not, otherwise the tail is wagging the dog. Have you ever stopped to think that maybe, because that maybe holds a space, and in quantum physics, we would say in superposition, that carries a certain probability. But if you don't hold space for it, you don't quote unquote feed it,
Right.
then you are possessed by this problem. It has you, you don't have it.
Hmm.
So, I mean, that's a very quick example of what I call the toxic shadow, where it possesses us. So I will resort to alchemy where I see it's fitting, some of the recipes or what formulas, of alchemy are profoundly wise. So I'll employ them. Sometimes I'll grab an operation. Very quick example of that. I had a woman, a real estate woman, middle-aged woman, come to me. This is decades ago, and her complaint. She and her husband, who she had divorced, were recovering alcoholics. So they went to the same AA meeting, etc. And she divorced him, but he didn't get the memo. So every place she would go, guess who's sitting next to her? Him. And she was going out of her mind. So this is not a woman who has no knowledge of alchemy or Jung or any of this stuff. She gets in her mind that I'm going to write his name down on a piece of paper and I'm going to stick it in the freezer. And somehow or other, that's going to get rid of him. I kind of chuckled. I said, well, we put things in the freezer to preserve them.
Right.
And so why don't you try burning the slip of paper? I'm not making this up. She did it and it remedied the whole situation. And not only that, but within months, she met a great guy and eventually married. So I'll pick and choose where I feel alchemy can be of use. And
Hmm.
again, this is, I'm a Jungian psychologist. So, Jung takes alchemy and has kind of decoded it, but he's kind of transformed it into a workable psychology. And that's kind of how I work. I know it's a long answer to your question, but it's a
No, I think
brief summary. I also
yeah,
do a lot of dream analysis also because that has a lot to do with transformation as well.
yeah. And I mean, kind of going back to Hermes, one of his epithets was the dream bringer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the idea of it being a message from the unconscious or from the soul.
Well, one of his unique properties that no other archetypal god possesses is that he's a boundary crosser. He can go into
Mhm.
other realms and come away immune. He wasn't destroyed. When Hercules, for example, the big, strong ego type, goes into the underworld. He meets up with this guy and he's threatened by him and he starts to beat him up, not realizing it was Hades.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to, have a little bit of that trickster ability to speak the language, whether it's to your body, whether it's to your unconscious, whether it's to your own death, to your shadow, in a language that it understands.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's that aspect of the trickster with cunning. Whereas, Hercules is kind of the big dumb hero with his club.
Yeah, exactly. And he served a purpose. I mean,
Yeah,
we need our heroes. We need our atlases. We need our those figures that are more masculinely toned. But again, when these alchemists would, they put something in their vessel and they add a little bit of mercury to it, lo and behold, it would, heat it up and it would evaporate. And the mercury didn't change, but what it extracted in a film around the vase, the vessel, was gold.
yeah.
So he's very, very catalytic, but in the process, he never loses the sense of himself.
Hmm.
That's very, very key. That regardless of the situation you're in, you never lose a sense of who you are. You may be a father, you may be a mother, an employer, a husband, or whatever. Those are roles. That's part of your persona. But you don't ever sacrifice or put into the unconscious who you really are. That's the real self. That's the
Right.
goal.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the
You
goal.
don't go full Dionysus. You don't go full
Either way,
mania.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
exactly,
You
exactly.
don't get too over identified and you don't get completely dissolved and lost. Yeah. Again, that third way, that middle way.
And we are at a time in our life when AI is taking over. It's becoming more increasingly autonomous, and we are losing our capacity to imagine, because we're
Yeah.
living on borrowed images. Technology is racing so quickly, which is spirit, and it's leaving behind soul. That's dangerous.
I'm with you. Yeah, my bumper sticker for a long time now about AI is that every time we outsource our creativity and thinking to AI, we're giving away a piece of our soul. So I'm glad
Yeah,
to hear you say that because I
yeah,
do think it's a kind of fight for the soul
yeah,
that we're
absolutely, absolutely.
and we can kind of unconsciously take on this new technology and it's it can be really wonderful
Oh
and be
yeah,
really
yeah,
productive and everything, but if we do it
yeah.
unconsciously and we lose ourselves and lose our essence, then we're lost.
We is not just personal, but I think the world is at stake.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, Tom, this has been really great. So, if people want to learn more about you and all of your books and writing, and you do courses online, I know,
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
cavallicoaching.com.
CavalliCoaching.com will bring you to. I have two websites. That's one that's a little bit more accessible. The other one is more alchemically oriented,
Mm,
alchemicalworks.com. The courses that you're referring to for the last, I've given what, four series of seminars, four or five each, on all of the stuff we're talking about. And that could be accessed on Jung Academy, one word, .com. And a lot of information, a lot of fun doing it, and I get a lot of just really nice comments. So it's available. Let's just put it that way.
yeah. When can we expect Living Alchemy? I mean, that sounds great. One of my
You
kind
are
of
the first person I'm going public with, so
uh-oh, okay.
I will
Yeah.
say this: I'm really obsessed with this. I can't stop writing. Uh, I don't any longer approach publishers before I've written the book. I
Mm,
don't want to live by their
yeah.
timelines. So I have no
Okay.
idea, no idea, but it's coming.
Mm. It sounds good to me, just kind of in terms of my orientation, being very kind of practical and embodied. And, whenever I read about alchemy and psychology, whether it's Hillman or Jung himself, I often get lost in the kind of the
Yes, yes,
headiness of it.
yes,
And
yes, yes.
yes, and those like the
Exactly,
stages. And I have a kind of
exactly.
a
Yeah, exactly.
allergic reaction to a lot of that
Yep,
stuff.
yep, yep, yep. And it took me years to kind of snap to it and realize this is not where people live. This is not our language. This is, you know.
Yeah.
So this book has a lot to do. It really is an anamnesis of remembering. Aristotle, I think, was said that, all learning is remembering.
Mm.
And so for me, some of the stories I've told today are real life experiences, and this book has a lot to do with, kind of integrating my personal experience with the more heady kind of stuff that we read in books. It's fun. I mean, I'm having a ball writing it.
Yeah. Great.
So.
Well, that delight is definitely a part of the Hermetic archetype too.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. The clown, the comedian. Yes.
Hmm. Well, Tom, great. Maybe we can speak down the road when
Sure.
the
Yeah.
books comes out. I'd
Okay.
really enjoy that.
Okay. I will do. I'll be
Uh,
happy to share that with you and your audience.
Thanks. All right. Take care, Tom.
You too. Thank you so much.
This conversation is brought to you ad-free thanks to the generous support of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon community. To gain access to early release of all episodes, the full podcast archives, and other extras, please visit patreon.com/Howl in the Wilderness.